I was 24 when I walked down the aisle in a white dress that cost more than my first car. The church was packed, 300 guests, my parents crying, my little sister holding the train. The music swelled, and there he was, Jake Carter, my fiancé, standing at the altar in his tux, grinning like this was the happiest day of his life. I took my place beside him, and that's when I noticed it. And his hands were shaking, and not the usual nervous groom jitters. His whole body was trembling, like he'd just run a marathon. I squeezed his fingers and whispered, "You okay?" He nodded, but his eyes were darting around the room like he was looking for an exit. And the priest started the vows. "Do you, Jake Carter, take Emily to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Jake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched. The guests shifted in their seats. My stomach dropped. And then, from the back of the church, a voice called out, "I object." And every head turned. A man in a tuxedo identical to Jake's was striding down the aisle. Same dark hair, same sharp jawline, same everything. My heart stopped. Jake wasn't an only child. He'd never mentioned a brother. And the stranger reached the altar and locked eyes with Jake. "You really thought you could pull this off?" he said, voice low and furious. And Jake's face went pale. "Ethan, what the hell are you doing here?" And the priest gasped. The guests erupted into whispers. My mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Emily, what's going on?" And he had no idea. And Ethan turned to me, his expression softening. "Emily, I'm sorry, this isn't Jake, it's me, I'm Jake." And he laughed, because that was the only thing that made sense. "No, that's Jake," I said, pointing at the man beside me. "You're his brother." And Ethan shook his head. "There is no brother, just me, and him." He gestured to the man I'd been about to marry, who was now sweating through his tux. "That's my twin, Ryan. He's been impersonating me for the last 6 months." And he felt like I'd been punched. 6 months? We'd met at a coffee shop. He'd taken me to meet his parents. We'd picked out this church together. Every memory flashed through my mind. His laugh, the way he'd proposed on a beach at sunset, the inside jokes we'd shared, and all of it, a lie. And he turned to Ryan. "Is this true?" And he swallowed hard. "Emily, let me explain. Is this true?" And he nodded. "Just once." And the church exploded. My dad stood up, yelling. My bridesmaids gasped. My little sister started crying. I just stood there, gripping my bouquet so hard the stems snapped. And Ethan stepped closer. "Ryan's a con artist. He's done this before. Found guys with money, studied their lives, then taken their place. He must have seen me with you somewhere and decided you were his next mark." And Ryan finally found his voice. "That's not fair. I fell for her too. I just didn't know how to tell her the truth." And he wanted to scream. "You had 6 months to tell me the truth." And the priest cleared his throat. Should we continue the ceremony?" And he laughed again, but this time it was bitter. "No, we should not continue the ceremony." I turned to Ryan. "Get out." And he hesitated, like he was going to argue, but Ethan stepped between us. "You heard her. Leave." And Ryan slunk out of the church, and the guests parted like the Red Sea. Ethan turned to me, his face full of regret. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was doing this. I've been in Europe for work. I just got back this morning." And he wanted to believe him. "But after everything, how could I trust anyone? Why should I believe you?" And he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Him and me at a charity gala 3 months ago. I remembered that night. He'd worn a blue suit. We'd danced to At Last, but in the photo, the man with me had a tiny scar above his eyebrow that Ryan didn't have. And Ethan had the scar. And he felt dizzy. "This is insane." And Ethan reached for my hand. "I know. And I'm so sorry you got caught in the middle. But I swear, I'm the real Jake. And I'd like to take you to dinner sometime, if you'll let me." And he should have said no. I should have walked away and never looked back. But there was something in his eyes. Something real. And after all the lies, I needed real. And so I nodded. And the guests were still whispering as Jake, led me out of the church. My mom called after me, but I didn't stop. I needed air. I needed answers. And as we stepped outside, Jake turned to me. "I know this is a lot, but I promise, I'm not him. And I'd really like to prove that to you." And he looked at him, the real him. And for the first time all day, I felt something other than shock or anger. I felt hope. But then I remembered Ryan's face when he'd looked at me. The way he'd said, "I fell for her too." Was Jake telling the truth? Or was this just another layer of the lie? And what would you have done?